Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be going in depth into 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. It's been an interesting week all the way around in terms of events happening in different countries related to COVID, embassies and consulates reopening and some missteps along the way. The whole issues of visas and vaccinations, I think, will be a recurring theme throughout the summer months as we get closer to the start of the fall semester. But today, as I do each week, I want to say thank you, obviously, to those that are watching live here on Facebook. And your participation in this weekly chat really makes a difference for me. Those that are watching on repeat, either on our YouTube channel or the Facebook page for SMIE Consulting, thank you. We know you're all busy, but we appreciate you making time in your week to hear our thoughts on how the impact on the world our profession has and how our profession is impacted by events of the world. And lastly, special shout out to our podcast listeners that make us a regular part of their weekly listening, whether on their walks, runs, or other stress relieving activities. Hopefully our words help give some food for thought for you along your journey in our robust and vibrant international education profession. So let's get right to it. First question of the week for May 19th, 2021. How should we network moving forward? And I say this on the day before NAFSA's deadline for registrants, early bird registrants for their upcoming virtual annual conference. And we've talked about NAFSA in the past, and to be honest, I'm a bit conflicted about my relationship with NAFSA over the years. I've grown quite a bit professionally due to opportunities I've had to present at regional conferences back in the day, but also through leadership roles I've had in a previous region in NAFSA, as well as working through our state consortia through the NAFSA Academy. I've been able to be a coach in the NAFSA Academy back in Academy 4. So I know firsthand the experiences and the benefits that NAFSA has provided. Oftentimes, as professionals, we kind of take for granted those organizations that represent us, particularly those that represent us in times of difficulty. And certainly NAFSA during the Trump administration had its work cut out for us, but they were one of our advocacy champions to fight the good fight for international education. So I say all of what I say with a little bit of hesitancy, but I know, having worked on regional NAFSA committees when planning regional conferences, how important to our regional conference, our regional NAFSA organization's budget and these annual conferences are to keeping that organization moving. Particularly at the national level, you know, of the many different organizations, service providers that make up the exhibit hall and pay membership fees and pay large fees to attend the annual NAFSA conference. Those in-person events have become almost essential in many international educators' lives. This past year has wrecked that model, frankly. We haven't been able to do that, and we haven't been able to meet in person. And the upcoming virtual annual conference for NAFSA, even with the early bird rate, seems a bit outrageous given the circumstances, but understanding also how important that annual conference is to giving NAFSA a budget to work with throughout the rest of the year in terms of staffing and all of those different things, advocacy work and that. But the double push in the last month when we got messages from NAFSA leadership about not only you got to come and support the conference, support us by coming to by attending the virtual conference. You also have the double whammy. Oh, we need you to renew your membership early because we need the money to keep going. So it was a kind of a desperate plea, and I get that, but I can't in good conscience spend the money, particularly as a consulting firm, a smaller business, a one-person shop. Really, I don't have necessarily that kind of money I'm going to devote to something that, frankly, I'm not going to get as much out of as I would as if I were in person, because it's the in-person networking that has really been the real value add for me, not the presentations I've been able to do or anything like that, the vendors I've been able to meet. It's that in-person networking that I've been able to find the most value of attending NAFSA conferences, particularly in recent years as an independent member not affiliated with the university. So it's easier, frankly, when you're at an institution because it's not your money necessarily that's paying the bill for a NAFSA conference. It's the institution's money, and you oftentimes have budgets. Obviously, budgets have been under a microscopic review, and there have been cuts, and professional development is often one of the first things cut. I get that, and that's another valid reason why a lot of institution members aren't able to certainly attend the virtual conference this year and are maybe hesitant about even renewing memberships. So there's a lot of competing forces, and NAFSA's not the only one in this. International ACAC is having their second virtual annual conference instead of physically at a university host as they have done for years, decades. They are now this year doing a second virtual conference, but they're charging a fee this year. They didn't last year. So it's not nearly as exorbitant as the NAFSA fee is. It's for International ACAC. Their in-person conference is usually 3 days. NAFSA's is usually 4 or 5 days, depending on whether you come for pre-conference workshops, which you also would need to pay an extra fee. So the value of these virtual events certainly takes a lot of getting used to. Everybody's done virtual events, whether it's been presentations, fairs, one-on-one visits with high schools, or even some virtual conferences that they might have attended in the last few months. Education USA has kept their forum free in the summer, late summer, so I'm encouraged by that, and certainly their willingness to open it up to others beyond just institutions and Education USA advisors. So there are good players out there. I'm not saying NAFSA or International AC aren't bad players. I know leadership on both levels at those organizations. And I know International ACAC, less so for the NAFSA, has a much lower membership fee, $75 to $100 for an individual member, as opposed to $600 for NAFSA for membership. So it's in a scale comparison, NAFSA is certainly at the top in terms of fees that they're charging, and International ACAC is towards the middle to bottom in terms of the extent of the fees. But you look at if you've done virtual conferences this past year and you've been working from home, is it really, because when you physically go to a conference, there's travel time, there's hotel, you don't have the hassle sometimes of that, but that's also it is a getaway. It's separating yourself from your regular day-to-day. And I've found in conversations with other professionals, not in international education, that this is really an issue is in the corporate world in terms of in the last year going to a virtual conference. It's hard to separate and make time for those events. And there's been some good articles on how that can be done and how you can manage your time effectively and all that. But the paying those fees to attend a virtual event when you're still working from home, where you don't have that experience, and it's not anything different than what you've really been doing, it's hard to separate that out and to pay those fees to make that happen. So there's obviously trade-offs, and that's something that I don't think NAFSA has done particularly well in the last year. They are doing an all-regional summit in the fall, which I think is a nod to the need to have something that's available to all members, not just this annual conference where you're going to really pay through the nose to be able to attend as an individual if an institution's not paying your way. So I bring this question up: how should we network moving forward? Because there's a couple of different levels to this. There's an article we put out we alluded to in the newsletter, our SMIE, all the SMIE news fit to share, that comes out on Mondays, and you can subscribe to that. I dropped the link in the comments section here on the Facebook page that allows you to get that subscription. But one of the stories was, I'm not going to be posting the link to today, but is on that newsletter, is about the future of recruitment and how that's going to change moving forward. It's from counselor at one of the UWC schools in Singapore. And he makes a very valid point about, well, do we really, what we've been doing this past year and figuring out how to do virtual, there's been some positives, there's been some negatives, but it's been a very much a monotony, very different, and lots of time and energy goes into setting up these events and hosting these events and meeting with the counselors. Different, obviously, than the physical visit, because that takes perhaps a lot more work. But the challenge is moving forward. Are these going to be sustainable if we are able to return to in-person visits and recruitment travel, which most travel warriors would say, yes, we have to get back to that eventually. And I might be leaning that way, but I certainly understand both arguments. There are those that I've worked with that are now at the point that say, hey, they're more concerned about their carbon footprint institutionally, and they look seriously about overseas recruitment travel as more of a luxury that they don't necessarily need to do anymore because of the impact on the globe. And so they're putting their money and their principles where their mouth is there. And I get that. That makes a lot of sense. So what can we do? And on the networking side, there have been free virtual events, and I support those, like with the EdUSA Forum. But one I do want to at least make sure it's on your radar is ConnectEd's Gather, Network, and Engage event that's coming June 23rd and 24th. It's branded as the 2021 Global Ed Gathering, and it's a free event for all to participate. And this is put up by Gen Next Education, and those that know Girish Balola. He has been initially was focused primarily on recruitment tours and Indian student recruitment for U.S. institutions, connecting secondary schools and colleges and universities in the States. But he's broadened his kind of remit, and so a lot of it is practically driven, that he hasn't been able to do the tours to India, obviously last year or even this year. Particularly now with India in the midst of a real dire situation as it relates to COVID. So he's put together and has had a team working on kind of an online platform, 24/7 approach to bring students and counselors and university reps together. But he's also doing, that's available separately from this. But this is something that I think is of particular value. This event, the networking event of the year, he's calling it Register for Free. So it's something that I think is worth considering. It's a 2-day event. It's a free event, but it's an opportunity for secondary school counselors and educators on the school side to get together with university and college representatives and network that way. So it's niche in that regard because it's not university partnerships. It's not as far as it's being billed. It's mostly a secondary school to college and university. So for those of you who are looking at undergraduate recruitment, this international recruitment, this is a meeting that is well worth considering. It's free. It's 2 days. And it is it's worth looking at in any case. So I'm certainly planning on attending, but I certainly want to let you know that I'm not completely discounting what NAFS is doing. I think their fall event is going to be successful in that regard. I think our regions in Region 6, instead of having individual state meetings, we're having a joint free 2-day NAFSA thing. In fact, right around the time of this 2021 Global Ed Gathering. So I'm really interested to see and hear your thoughts on what networking is going to look like moving forward. We will get back to some form of in-person meetings, maybe not this year, maybe not next year even. But this is a concern for professionals that will continue to exist moving forward. It's not something that's going to just die. But we all need it. We all need that personal connection in order to grow as professionals and to grow what we do in our business and in our profession in international education. So, a lot to say on that, and I'll be interested to see how this Global Ed Gathering goes later on in June. So let's shift gears now and talk about question number 2. How well are we treating international students in this country? This is a theme that really speaks to the heart of who we are as international educators, I think. And when you look at this country and what we've been through in the last 4 years with regards to anti-immigrant rhetoric, with regards to a president who really did not see any value, and it was only speaking words when and if he had to give a speech that had to do with things international. It always was about America first, not about our impact on the world, our positive influence that our educational institutions have on future world leaders, any of that. That was never even crossed his mind, and as a leader of our country and a leader of the free world, whatever that means these days. But I think what's important, because it hits at the core of who we are as international educators, and particularly on the inbound international side, it's taking care of those students that come to our campus. Because if we don't, and they have bad experiences, they go home and they tell friends, that only backfires on us if we're not properly caring for these students while they're in our care, on our campuses, in our worlds. So there have been a couple of articles that have popped up this past week. One that's a procedural change that actually shows, I think, in a very positive way, how, as a country, we value international students, and that was the U.S. Department of Education's decision to announce more than $36 billion in emergency grants for post-secondary education under the America Rescue Plan Act's Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And that's a long acronym, HEERF3, Roman numeral 3. And the positive news that's come out of this new government relief program for higher ed is that for the first time, international students will be eligible for that assistance at an institutional level. So that is really encouraging to hear this coming out of the administration. And I think they're beginning to reverse that tide and their actions on day 1 and 2 of their administration after the inauguration certainly reflected that in terms of sending a message to the world that we do actually want international students here and we care for them. And here is a very real way of saying we're putting our money where our mouth is, because the dollars that international students who have not previously been able to access federal money in terms of COVID-19 relief, in terms of the financial impact the pandemic has had on international students, on their families back home that haven't been able to maybe afford the full cost of education. A lot of institutions, frankly, and to their credit, have stepped up and been able to provide emergency funds to students. Some of that is well received and helps get students through, but some of it is just smaller dollars and is limited and is not going to cover huge gaps. So there are other things in the regulations that do allow for emergency work authorization for students to work off campus to help provide for their day-to-day needs. But some of this welcome relief from the U.S. government, I think, is an important step in that direction of showing we are valuing international students here, and that in a real and concrete way, financial way, in times of pandemic. And that's important, I think, an important sign that the federal government is making that a priority. Finally, certainly we haven't had that as a priority in the government for the last 4 years, so it's welcome news, to be sure. The other article that reflects well on this topic, or speaks directly to this topic, is from the president of Franklin Marshall College, a small liberal arts college, very well regarded institution, liberal arts institution, but also a very strong record in international education, bringing international students in from a diversity of countries, and having funding available to help the neediest of those that are applying get there and sustain their time there. I bring this article up because it focuses on something I talk about all the time, and it's the relationships, the personal relationships we need to be successful in what we do. Whether that's working with your counselor networks, your Education USA networks, potentially agent networks. Those only succeed when you have strong relationships with those partners. When you are invested in them, they are invested in you, and it's a two-way street. I think we get into the trap that going down the road, and there are institutions I'm working with that are newer to international admissions and international student recruitment that don't know where to start, frankly, and There may be potential to one proposal that was to spend 6 figures with a particular vendor that would get them no guarantees of students, but they would pay a hefty fee for those students to be even prospects and enter into their own systems, internal institutional systems. That's not a sustainable model. That's certainly not a relationship-based model. That's here, we're going to pay you money, we want students in return model. And that's, in international education, is not a sustainable model, frankly. So what with all my clients I work with on the institutional side, this is foundational to how, if they're not willing to go down this road and approach it through a relationship-based and personally investing in the relationships that need to be developed to sustain an institution long-term in international education and be strategic about it, I won't work with them on those kind of big projects. I will spend my capital, my personal time, my professional time, working with institutions that see value in the long term, in building relationships, and not just in it for the short-term gain and getting a class in the fall. Those levers can be pulled sometimes here and there for small, immediate results. But if you want to grow consistently, to grow double your enrollment in 5 years, you need to be intentional about the partnerships you are setting up and professionally and build professional relationships that show to these third parties, the school counselors, Education USA, agents you work with, other service providers you work with, that your intentions are to bring in students that are going to benefit your institution, but also that you can invest in. And you show that through your actions, through how you take care of those students from the time that they're initial prospects to the time that they're arriving on campus as enrolling students, to the time they're going for their preparing for jobs after graduation, helping them with internships and job placements, and welcoming them into your alumni community all the way through that student journey. Making that journey transparent, making that journey seamless for your international students, and showing your care for them throughout that process. Those are the campuses that get that I get excited about, that I want to work with, that see the long-term gain of pursuing a path that really shows institutionally that they are committed to international education, that it's not just we need more international students. Everybody needs more international students unless you're one of the elites that can really handpick the students from around the world that they want on their campus because they have limited incoming first-year classes. But they get tens of thousands of applications, and they don't need to be worried about more. They pick the ones that they need for their campuses. This is I'm talking about the greater majority of institutions in the United States that are grappling with the issues of how do we sustain an international education, a strategic international enrollment management plan. And I've talked about the 6 Ps of strategic international enrollment management before. I'll have an article coming out soon, my 5th article in the 6P series on personalization, and we'll talk about that. And this relationship piece is really central to it. And part of that is what the president of Franklin and Marshall, Barbara Altman, says in her piece in University Business, that it really, internationally speaking, particularly now during this pandemic, she speaks directly to the kinds of issues that I've been talking about for months, about how important it is that you are communicating effectively with your prospective students, with your current students as well, about how the pandemic is impacting the university, how the university is then caring for, and core college in this case, caring for the students that are already on campus, but also coming to campus. And you show that care in terms of investing in the relationships you have with them on all levels. Again, from prospective student to current students to alumni to parents of current students throughout the process. You show your worth to them, how much you value their students, the students themselves. And that really speaks volumes for your institutional commitment, and those small things you do today can have long-lasting positive impacts when it's driven by this desire to invest in them as people, to invest in their future. and helping them develop what they need to develop to be successful long term. And that's our role as institutions, is to help provide a pathway to success for everybody who comes to our institutions. And the more we focus on that, and that people focus nature of what we do as really the core. And my 6 Ps is all about that. It's about purposefully picking people how throughout the processes that you have in your day-to-day. It's prioritizing them. It's making the people that you're dealing with, the students, the staff, everyone around you, your priority. And that's not easy to do. It frankly takes a fairly all-encompassing approach to how you do international education and how you conduct yourselves as a university president. So I really appreciate this kind of a message, and I understand why people love working there. And a number of colleagues that I've known have worked at Franklin and Marshall. They have nothing but positive things to say about the ethos of the school. And those are the kinds of schools that really are the shining beacons for the rest that want to go down that path and that want to invest in relationships and invest in the students and in all sorts of different ways. And I really tip my hat to Franklin and Marshall for the outstanding work that they're doing there and leading by example. Now, as we wrap up today with this final topic, it's one that we've touched on several times in the past couple of months, and that will continue to be a theme, as I've mentioned earlier, and that's to mandate or strongly recommend vaccinations for this fall. That's the question. That's the $64,000 question that colleges are answering right now. And there's a few articles that are popped in the last week that I think are worth mentioning. And I'm thinking about even adding a visas and vaccinations section to my newsletter, because there's going to be so many more stories like this over the coming months. First is from The Hill, and it's written by Alan Goodman, President and CEO of IIE, Institute of International Education, and Harris Bastides. I'm not familiar with who he is, but it's an article that says, "Let's give vaccinations for international students the old college try." And Alan, who I've known for a number of years, he makes the case that we're in a very privileged position in the United States regarding vaccinations, where we're providing more vaccinations are available than we have people to take them right now. And that is something that we're in the process of making these available worldwide. We're sending 20 million AstraZeneca vaccines, which ironically are not on FDA's approved list of vaccinations. We have 20 million of those stored up. We're sending them abroad. We're also going to be doing that with some of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines as well. We're going to be sending those abroad as well. Came out this past week. But when it comes to our international students, many of them don't yet have access to vaccines in their home country. Some in China have, relatively few in India. They're only at about 5–10% of the population vaccinated, which is huge numbers, but for students, there are very few that are getting that. In some African countries, they're starting to roll out, but they're certainly not widespread yet. Talking to a colleague in Nigeria yesterday, she said that they are getting typically the AstraZeneca is the one that's available for their citizens, but not broadly yet. You have long waits. You can't make appointments in advance like we have the pleasure and luxury of doing here in the U.S. I was sharing with her that in some places in the U.S. now you can walk into a CVS or a Walgreens and you can get your first shot right away. It's just that available. So this article makes the point from Alan Goodman that we should be making these available for international students as well, and many institutions are already planning that. But it's really the legwork that needs to happen now to really make it a reality for the fall. A couple others, obviously, we every week we post the updated numbers of institutions that are requiring vaccines. It was over 350 last Friday when we got the link. I think it's 375 now. There are some colleges that are not mandating vaccinations because they don't, and there's some good reasoning behind this. They don't want to mandate something that is for emergency use only, and all 3 of the vaccines that have been approved in the U.S. by the FDA are for emergency use only, not as standard like a MMR vaccine or tetanus shots or any of those other things that we can get that have been around for decades. This is something that's different. It's for the ones that are approved have been emergency use only. There's some signs that maybe they are moving to making those available, some of those vaccines available for regular use. So I know some parents are real hesitant about untested vaccines, about getting it for themselves. And even though Pfizer is now available for 12 and above, ages 12 and above, some are hesitant to inoculate their kids for something that's not been thoroughly tested and is on a regular approved list. So there's some of that. And two systems, CUNY and SUNY systems in New York, are not going to require it, a vaccination. Inside Higher Ed story on this. They're to require it only if the FDA makes that change to regular approval, not just emergency use only. And there are some other state systems that may be looking to go that route as well. California, there are some schools that smartly are moving towards accepting students who've been vaccinated by any of the WHO kind of global health organization for approval of vaccinations, and one of the Chinese vaccinations, Sinopharm, has been approved. There's some other ones in here that obviously the AstraZeneca one, Oxford out of Oxford, that's been approved. There's others as well that are looking at that because as a nod, again, another nod to how well we're treating students, is how we are allowing their vaccines back home to potentially cover them here as well for in-person study. So some great articles this week on the vaccinations. Surely it won't be the last, but I think there's a lot of planning and logistics that need to go into place now if you are going to be vaccinating students upon arrival if they haven't had a chance to be vaccinated yet. So we'll keep an eye on those developments as we get closer to arrivals. But I can't emphasize enough how important communicating what your policies are going to be to your prospective students. And we had this last fall with opening schedules for U.S. institutions, and we're going to have it this fall for vaccinations as well as most going back to in-person, what those health and safety protocols are going to be and how well you're communicating that to your overseas audiences, and all students, frankly, is going to matter most. So that's what we have for you today on the Midweek Roundup. Thanks again for making us a part of your weekly international edification, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon. Cheers.